I'm Sausan Aulia from Business Process Management Assistance. In this tutorial video, I'm going to show you the variables and Dynaforms in Process Maker, why is it important, and how to create it. Firstly, the variables. So what is variable? Basically, the function of variables here in the Process Maker is the same with variables in programming languages, as you may already know, which is to store a value. Or, to be more specific, the variables in Process Maker is to store values that are obtained from the Dynaform itself. To make it easier for you to understand, we can say that Dynaform is like a Google form or any other form that you've ever seen. And to make a Dynaform, we must create a variable first. So now, I'm going to make a variable called name. And below the variable name, there are several variable types that you can choose. And for this variable, I'm going to use the string type. And for the database connection and SQL, it will be explained later in the next video. So for now, we're going to use it as it is. And here, we can see that there's a feature called define accepted variable values, which will also be explained later. Now we're going to save it, and we're going to the terms variable to see how the accepted variable values will be used in the Dynaform. So, in this terms variable, we will use the define accepted values. And as you can see here, we already created some accepted variable values like due on receipt, net 15, and so on. This feature is to limit the values that can be accepted by this variable. When we use it later, it will be a bit different with using a basic string variable type. So for now, we're going to save it and we're going to continue to the Dynaform. So to create a Dynaform, you need to click the Dynaform menu here, and then you can create it by clicking the create button, and you'll see this window to input the Dynaform information. You can fill it based on your needs. For the example here, we're going to create a report form with this description, and we can click save and open. So this is how it looks like at first, and we can start to create our Dynaform here. And in the left side of the page, we can see that there are several controls or features, and you can read all the complete description for all these features in the Process Maker documentations. But for this video, we're only going to use some of the features here. So to start the Dynaform, we will need a title. So to create it, we can just drag the title feature from the web controls and drop it on the top of the Dynaform. And after it is placed on the top of the Dynaform, we can rename the title by filling the label field in the properties menu on the left side of the page. So for this Dynaform, we will rename it as invoice information. Next, we can use a subtitle to divide the Dynaform into several parts. It's basically the same with the title, but it will be on the smaller font size. We will rename it as user details. The next thing that we can do in the Dynaform is to manage the size of a layout. So for example, here we want to divide the third field into two. We can do it by using the call span here. The maximum size of a field is 12, so if we want to divide it into two, we can change it into 6 and 6 with a space between them. So next, we will use a text box. So you can drag it from the web controls and drop it there. And you will see this window where you can select the variable to store the value. There are two options to pick a variable. You can create a new one if you haven't, or you can select the variable from the variables that you already made before. For this one, we will choose the variable name. Another feature that we can use is the required feature, which is basically the same with the required feature in any other forms like Google Form. So when we use it, the user will need to fill this field and it cannot be left blank. And next, we can use another text box for the email address. And we will add more text box for the address. So for this address field, we will use the hint feature. So this feature is to give the user hint on what to fill on this field. So for example, we will write that as the hint, and if we preview it, there will be an eye on the left side of the field, and if we hover to it, it will tell the user the hint. And for the next one, we will create another subtitle for the invoice details. And we're going to divide it into two again, and next we're going to use a drop down for the invoice type. Okay, so when we're using a drop down, when we click the arrow here, it's supposed to show us the options that we can choose, right? But for now, if we preview it, it won't show us any options. Why? Because it will be managed in the PM tables, which will be explained in the PM tables video later. So for now, we're just gonna leave it like this. So for the next one, we are going to create a field for the users to input a date using the date time in the web control. It will be used for the invoice date variable. And if we preview it, on the left side of the field, there will be a little calendar for the user to pick the date. Okay, so next we will create another drop down for the invoice subtype. We can drag it from the web controls and choose the invoice subtype. Next, we are going to use the radio feature from the web control for the terms variable. So this feature will create options with radio buttons like that. And you do remember that when we were creating the terms variable, we used the accepted variable values feature, right? So this is how it is used in the Dynaform. So the accepted variable values will appear here automatically for the user to choose. And if we preview it, the users will be able to pick one of those radio buttons. For the next one, we will create a grid. And for a grid, it can only be used by a variable with a grid type. And here we can see a message saying supports text box, text area, drop down checkbox, and etc. And those are the web control features that can be used in this grid. And for now, I'm just going to fill the grid according to the module. Okay, so now we have 4 columns inside the grid, and we can change the grid name by clicking the white field. and change the title in the properties menu. So the function of the grid is to separate a field into several columns, and for all the values that are being entered into the grid will be stored in a grid variable. Next, we can also manage the size of the columns inside the grid. So for one column, the maximum size is 100, but because we have 4 columns inside the grid, we can set the size to 25 for each grid. So for the total, we can automatically calculate the total based on the value that the users enter in the other columns. So we can use the formula feature here. So here we can write the formula for the columns that we want to calculate. For example, the formula for the total is quantity times unit cost. So we can write it here. And you need to keep in mind that the one that you write here is the ID of the field that you want to calculate, or the column that you want to calculate, not the title. And we can save it, and then we also need to change the function. So if we want to calculate, or we want to total, or we want to sum some rows, we can use the function here. And because we want to calculate the total, we can use the sum function. We can try it out by previewing the Dynaform, but before that we need to make sure that the formula and the function that we enter is already correct. And now this is how a grid looks like. We can add a new row by clicking the new button here, and we can enter the data that we want. For example, the quantity is 20, the description is chair, and the unit cost is 500. And we can see here that the total is being automatically calculated based on the formula that we have created before. And for the sigma sign here, or the function, it is to calculate the values that are in the total column. So if we add another row, the function will calculate it. Okay, so next we will create another subtitle for the line items. And in the Process Maker Dynaform, we can move any fields that we've created before. So for example, like this, if you want to move the subtitle above the grid, you can just move it by clicking the plus sign here and drag and drop it wherever you want. The last one, we will create a submit button. So when the Dynaform is actually being used while the process is running, if the user clicks the submit button, all the values that the user have entered will be submitted and stored in the database. And here we can also test the required feature. So if we click a submit without filling the name and email address, it will show us the error message saying this field is required. And then I will explain some other features that you'll probably use later. So here I already created a text area. So the text area is actually similar with a text box, but it has larger size, so the users can enter longer text values. And for the last one, it is a file upload feature or multiple file, and it is used to upload a file in the Dynaform. So if we preview the Dynaform, we can see the button to upload your file. So you can click it and choose the file you want to upload, and it will be uploaded to the Dynaform, and it will be stored in the multiple file variable type. But here there's an error because we haven't set the format limitations for the files to be uploaded, but if you want to use it later, you can always explore it more on the Process Maker documentation. And here we can actually set the file extensions, the maximum file size, and the size unit, etc. Okay, so that was all for the variable and Dynaform explanation. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to the assistants. Thank you for watching and good luck!